We were staying in a massive white house in Maine that looked exactly like the setting of a horror novel. But the real nightmare wasn't the house itself. It was the eccentric owner living behind an unlocked, adjoining door right next to my bedroom. This story took place during my senior year of high school, a time when I was navigating that awkward transition between childhood and adulthood. Looking back, I have to acknowledge that I was a bit of a piece of garbage during that period. I wasn't a bad kid in the sense of getting into serious trouble or breaking the law, but I was a total punk when it came to my family. I had a loving, supportive family, but I was at that age where I felt I was far too cool to spend any actual time with them. I was rebellious, specifically toward my parents, and I hated being expected to entertain my little brother, Jake. He was only 10 years old at the time, and being 8 years older than him, I felt like we were practically different species. I had zero interest in the things he liked, and I viewed family vacations as a chore rather than a privilege. My family has always loved the ocean, so whenever we took trips, we usually stayed somewhere on or near the coast. We lived about 5 hours away from the shore, which made it a relatively easy trip to make. However, this specific year, my parents decided to change things up and take us to Maine. Now, as an adult, I can appreciate that Maine is beautiful and I would honestly love to go back there. But as a disgruntled 18-year-old, I thought this was the absolute worst trip we could ever take. I spent the entire drive up there complaining and making it known that I would much rather be back home with my friends. When we finally arrived at the rental house, I had to admit, even to myself, that the place was incredible. It was a massive white house with green shutters, tucked deep within a dense thicket of trees. It looked like something straight out of a Stephen King novel, which was incredibly fitting given our location. My dad, leaning into the atmosphere, made a joke about how this was exactly how most horror movies start. It probably wasn't the best thing to say in front of a 10-year-old, but Jake didn't seem to care at all. He was just as mesmerized by the scale and the look of the house as I was. The interior of the house was just as strange and fascinating as the exterior. It was designed like a maze. The back center of the house featured a huge living room with an awesome, expansive view of the forest stretching out behind the property. But the rest of the layout was bizarre. There were all these hallways that intersected in places that didn't make any logical sense. It felt like a house someone would design in a video game like The Sims, rather than something you would encounter in real life. However, the weirdest part of the property wasn't the nonsensical hallways. It was the fact that our rental was connected to a small adjoining house where the owner lived. The owner's name was Hugh, and he was a very strange individual. He was a tall man who constantly wore a very old, sweat-stained bucket hat. His teeth were noticeably yellow, but it wasn't his appearance that was the most striking thing about him. It was his personality. He was incredibly goofy, loud, and eccentric. When we arrived, he welcomed us with over-the-top friendliness, repeatedly mentioning how kind folks from Maine were. My family did their best to be polite, nodding along while he rambled. He told us that he lived right next door if we needed anything, but otherwise, he promised we wouldn't see or hear from him for the entire week. None of us were particularly thrilled about having the landlord basically living in the same building, but there was nothing we could do, so my parents decided to make the best of it. While my family was trying to be positive, I was being difficult. I wanted any excuse to leave and go home. On our first morning there, during breakfast, my parents announced we were going on a great hike. I immediately protested, and after some arguing, they finally gave in and let me stay behind while the three of them went out. The truth was, I didn't care about the hike because I had just started dating a girl named Danny right before the vacation. I wanted to stay back and talk to her, knowing that if I went into the woods, I'd lose cell service. So, I ditched my family to text my girlfriend and tell her all about the weird house we were staying in. I was sending Danny pictures of the strange layout, and when I mentioned the adjoining house where Hugh lived, she didn't believe me. To prove it to her, I told her I would send a video. At the end of one of the hallways, right next to my bedroom door, was the door that led to Hugh's side of the house. I assumed the door would be locked, but when I turned the handle, it opened right up. It was incredibly unsettling to realize that the owner's living quarters were completely accessible and located directly adjacent to where I would be sleeping. Despite the creepiness, I walked inside while on FaceTime with Danny. It was a normal, modest house with a TV and a couch. Suddenly, I heard a door shut somewhere else in Hugh's house. Panic set in and I sprinted back to our side of the house. A few minutes later, there was a knock at our door. It was Hugh. He was still acting cheerful and goofy, but he asked me why I had been recording videos inside his house. I tried to lie and say I had just gotten lost, but he didn't buy it. He told me he had cameras inside and had received an alert when the door opened. He'd seen me on video flashing my phone around. Once I realized I was caught, I told him the truth. He just laughed it off and made a weird comment about how nobody in Maine locks their doors. After he left, I immediately locked the door and propped a large wooden chair against it as a makeshift barricade. Danny told me she didn't trust him and that I needed to protect myself. When my family returned, they were angry that I had trespassed, but I just yelled back at them. Shortly after, they decided to go out for dinner. Again, I refused to go. They were tired of fighting with me, so they left me alone, promising to bring food back. As the sun went down, the area became pitch black. I was sitting on the couch texting Danny when a loud crash echoed through the house. It came from the hallway where Hugh's door was. My heart raced as I realized the sound was likely the wooden chair being knocked over. I thought Hugh was breaking in. I snuck toward the hallway, hoping to catch him, but it was too dark to see. When I finally flipped the light switch, I saw the chair on the floor, and next to it was a backpack that definitely did not belong to me. Realizing someone was in the house, I ran to the screened-in porch and locked myself in, hiding under a patio table in the fetal position, realizing I had left my phone in the living room. I thought the strange homeowner was the one breaking into our rental, but the truth revealed by his security cameras was much more terrifying. A total stranger had been hiding in my bedroom the entire time I was home alone. Let's begin the story. I sat huddled in the fetal position under the patio table on the screened-in front porch, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt completely vulnerable because, in my rush to escape the main part of the house, I had left my phone sitting on the living room couch where I had been texting Danny. The silence of the Maine woods was broken only by the sound of footsteps coming from inside the house. These weren't the frantic or heavy steps of someone searching. They were normal, calm walking sounds, which somehow made the situation feel even more sinister. I had no way to call for help and no idea who was walking through the hallways I had just fled. I don't know exactly how much time passed as I waited in the dark, but it felt like an eternity. Finally, the darkness was cut by the bright beams of headlights as my dad's van pulled into the driveway. I didn't wait for them to come inside. I scrambled out from under the table, ran to the car, and frantically told them to stay inside. I was terrified and speaking incoherently, trying to explain that someone was in the house and that I had found a mysterious backpack. My parents looked at me with utter confusion, likely thinking I was just having another one of my dramatic outbursts. Just as I was trying to convince them of the danger, Hugh suddenly appeared, approaching our car. Seeing him in the dark nearly made me collapse from fright. However, Hugh wasn't his usual goofy, eccentric self. He looked like he had seen a ghost, and his body language was stiff and serious. He leaned over and told my dad that he needed to speak with him in private. I tried to pull my dad back, fearing Hugh was the threat, but my dad dismissed me and listened to what the owner had to say. After a brief, hushed conversation, my dad's face went pale. He shook Hugh's hand, turned to us, and sternly told us all to get back into the van immediately. My dad drove us away from the house at a high speed, eventually pulling into a grocery store parking lot about a mile down the road. Within minutes, we saw several police cars with sirens blaring racing toward the house we had just left. We all started yelling at my dad, demanding to know what was happening. He finally explained the terrifying truth. Hugh had also heard the loud noise from earlier. The impact of the heavy wooden chair hitting the floor had been so strong that it triggered the motion sensors on Hugh's security cameras in his own side of the house. Initially, Hugh thought I was just playing a prank or trying to sneak back into his quarters. He checked his own cameras and saw nothing, but a gut feeling told him something was wrong. He decided to check a camera he had hidden in the hallway of the side we were renting, a major invasion of our privacy, but one that saved my life. It was too dark to see anything at first, but when I had briefly flipped the light switch before running to the porch, the camera captured a chilling sight. A tall, bald man stepped out of the very bedroom where I was supposed to be sleeping. He wasn't my dad, and he certainly wasn't me. The camera showed the man grabbing the mystery backpack near the door and retreating back into my bedroom. Hugh had run outside immediately to help, arriving just as I was hiding on the porch. He didn't want to enter the house through the adjoining door because he feared alerting the intruder and putting me in even greater danger. Instead, he hid in the yard with a clear view of the house, watching over me until my parents returned. While we waited in the grocery store parking lot, Hugh called my dad to tell us that the police had arrived and chased the man into the woods, though they hadn't caught him yet. Hugh was kind enough to gather our belongings from the house and bring them to us so we wouldn't have to go back. We stayed at a hotel that night and drove home the next morning, never finishing our vacation. My dad reached out to Hugh months later, but the intruder was never found. They never even figured out how he got in or what his intentions were. I spent a long time telling myself he was just someone looking for shelter just so I could sleep at night. But the image of a stranger hiding in my room while I sat just feet away still haunts me. It taught me that sometimes the scariest things are the people hiding in plain sight.